And now we have Professor Ali Duffy, who has very kindly stepped forward to offer her Shakespeare expertise on the subject of Shakespeare and the iconic choreography of the 20th and 21st century. So take it away.
The first thing I'd like to do is point your attention to an essay contest that's being held. I'll let you read through this on your own, but this is also a website you can go to for information about it. If you're a student and you're interested in writing an essay about Shakespeare and his legacy, you have the chance to win a $1,000 undergraduate scholarship. Take advantage of this. Take note of the website and consider writing something. You're all wonderful writers.
It will be about Professor Cantor's lecture. So you must go to the lecture in order to do that. And thank you for getting that into the program.
So I'm calling this lecture Dancing Poetry, Shakespeare's Influence on Iconic Choreographers of the 20th and 21st Centuries. Again, my name is Ali Duffy. I'm an associate professor here in the dance program. Of the many writers and poets who have inspired choreographic exploration, none have influenced as many prominent choreographers as has William Shakespeare. Not only does his work support choreographers working in different genres of dance, such as ballet, contemporary, and hip-hop, but his work also inspired choreographers over many generations to create new dance works. Shakespeare's masterful languaging and complex use of hyperbole, meter, and metaphor create perfect opportunities for dance makers to delve into his work through multifaceted lenses. I became interested in Shakespeare's work and its possible intersections with choreography in 2013, when I was approached by a doctoral student here in theater about collaborating on a project together inspired by Shakespeare's Love Sonnets. So in 2013, 6 choreographers from my dance company, Flatlands Dance Theater, collaborated with dramaturgs Rick St. Peter and Karen Wuerl to bring Shakespeare's Love Sonnets to life on the stage. And you can see in these images, sonnets 15, 100, 139, and 147 depicted in dance. Reflecting back on the work I created, called Trace, adapted from Sonnet 15, I explored the themes of immortality, memory, infatuation, and perception I found in the sonnet. I incorporated dance, personal interview narrative, and Shakespeare's writings. It is thought that in his love sonnets, Shakespeare was interested in capturing moments of perfection, an effort to immortalize his muse. So in my work, I asked the question, how can writing and language capture the essence of a living presence? The richness and complexity of the sonnets were almost too intimidating to broach in my work, so I included this soloist I set the work on in the creative process, and this is a guest artist that my company brought in. She was the soloist in the work. Our shared interpretation of the sonnet influenced the way that the dance evolved. I have since been commissioned to reset this dance on 3 undergraduate students, and we presented that at UNC Charlotte last February. That's the picture over to the left, which allowed me another opportunity to consider how Shakespeare's poetry inspires movement and multiple interpretations. Before I begin a discussion about specific choreographers working to imagine Shakespeare's work in dance on stage, I would be remiss not to mention many of the instances in which dance emerges in the action of the plays themselves, and discuss some of the reasons scholars say he included so many instances of dance. Shakespeare seemed to understand the central role dance plays in societies, and often makes social dance forms a major point of connection between characters and to provide context about character development and their positions in the hierarchy of society. For example, Sir Toby and Sir Andrew make the numerous references to specific Renaissance dance steps in Act 1, Scene 3 of Twelfth Night. Later in the play, the same characters discuss social position based on their expertise of the galliard. This is a courtly dance. Probably some of the dance students in the room have heard of it. This is, of course, the precursor of classical ballet that we know today. Romeo and Juliet needed a dance. Oberon and Titania reconcile with a dance. We're told how enchantingly Cleopatra once hopped 40 paces down the street. In the final scene of As You Like It, Duke Senior addresses the 4 young couples, quote, "Brides and bridegrooms, dance your happiness away," end quote. In Shakespeare's plays, dance and movement often recur. There are even moments when characters exclude themselves from dancing. Jacques in As You Like It declines to join in, quote, "I am for other than for dancing measures," end quote. In Romeo and Juliet, Lord Capulet says to a cousin, quote, "You and I are past our dancing days," end quote. These examples demonstrate how particular choreographic choices emphasize themes and provide insight into the director's interpretation of the play, in addition to providing visual and musical pleasure for the audiences. In the late 1500s, when Shakespeare's company performed his plays, dancing was a necessary accomplishment for all actors. He who was not a good dancer was not considered a good actor either. Further, at that time, it was customary to end a performance of a play with a dance by some of the members of the company. It is no wonder then that given the references to dance in spoken dialogue, and within the action of the plays, as mentioned previously, choreographers find easy bridges into their work to reimagine Shakespeare in the context of choreography. Whereas most of the focus of my lecture today will be on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and the play's influence on choreographers of the 20th and 21st centuries, I want to also briefly survey the vast array of works his other plays and poetry have inspired. People began adapting Shakespeare in dance terms over 250 years ago. Jean-Georges Noverre, the most influential choreographer of the second half of the 18th century, produced a version of Antoine and Cleopatra in the 1760s in Germany. Salvatore Vigano, one of the most prominent predecessors, staged Othello in Milan in the 19th century. Shakespeare's ballets seem to have a resurgence in dance in the mid to late 1900s, when in the 1960s, Mendelssohn's score prompted both Balanchine's and Ashton's versions of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is what Ballet Lubbock is producing this weekend. This is still considered by many critics and scholars two of the greatest Shakespeare ballets today. Also during the late 20th century, Pina Bausch's adaptation of Macbeth, Lar Lubovich's Othello, and Rudolf Nureyev's The Tempest traveled through the repertoire of several ballet and modern dance companies. So in my research, I discovered a website devoted to Shakespeare and dance called the Shakespeare and Dance Project. I just wanted to pull that up for you to see. It's a really cool website. Oh, what happened? It's a really great website, and I wanted to take you to this. I just need to pull it over a little more, I guess. I wanted to take you to a list of there we go. So this is a list of works that have been influenced by Shakespeare's. And it's not an exhaustive list, but it gives you a kind of an idea of what's been happening since the 1700s in dance. So you can see it is an extensive list. You can see that Hamlet really struck a chord with choreographers, as did A Midsummer Night's Dream. You can see all the choreographers that have investigated that. Othello, and Romeo and Juliet, by far the longest list of choreographers interested in exploring the story and the themes in it. So I just kind of wanted to show you, because I felt like it's a pretty great list. It kind of gives you an idea of how interested choreographers are in connecting their work to Shakespeare's. Some of my favorite retellings of Shakespeare's works through choreography include George Balanchine's adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream. It premiered in 1962 and is still performed by many ballet companies today. And I wanted to show you a brief clip of A Midsummer Night's Dream, the Balanchine version of it. And these are just excerpts. I think it was used as promotion for the show. Frederick Ashton's The Dream is also based on A Midsummer Night's Dream. This one-act ballet premiered in 1964 at the Royal Ballet and focused closely on the fairies and four lovers from Athens Lost in the Wood, rather than adapting the entire play. The Morse Pavane by José Limón is a 20-minute dance work based on Othello. It premiered in 1949 and is often called a ballet, but does sit squarely within the modern dance genre, as it was influenced by the work of Doris Humphrey. The dance is a quartet, the dancers representing the Moor, first played by Limón himself, Desdemona, Iago, and Emilia. I wanted to show a brief clip of this one too. This kind of gives you an idea of how costuming is sort of used in some of the more modern iterations of Shakespeare's work in a very similar way. So you'll notice the costumes look kind of similar to what they would in a romantic ballet, but the movement itself is where we really start to find innovation. And I should ask, can you see this okay with the lights on? Okay. Just take it forward a bit. The balletic lines from Midsummer Night's Dream that you saw before from Balanchine, but in this case, and in the case of shifting more into modern forms of dance, you're starting to see more of a grounded presentation of the body on the stage, and you're also seeing different staging and adaptation of the way the cast unfolds. So in José Limón's representation, you only see 4 people on stage through the whole dance work, while in Balanchine's A Midsummer Night's Dream, it's much more in line with a classical ballet in which you have an entire corps de ballet, soloists, and principal dancers. In 2012, Doug Elkins created Moortown Redux as an intentional update of Limón's classic, The Morse Pavane. Incorporating Motown music and exploring fluid gender roles, Elkins takes Othello to new terrain, showing viewers the timelessness of the themes and conflicts present in Shakespeare's work. So I'm so very sorry that I don't have video of this. There is none available. But the work is really kind of amazing in the way that it innovates what José Limón did with the Morse Pavane. And so you're hearing work that's recognizable, like I heard it through the grapevine, music that you associate with another time that he has taken and made relevant to Shakespeare's work, and also José Limón's. It's a super cool piece. So if you ever see that it's being played somewhere, go see it. But you can also see there's a unique use of weight sharing and partnership here that's really relevant to modern dance of the early 2000s. It's men lifting men instead of men just lifting women, which sort of changes how men and women relate to each other, particularly in relation to Shakespeare's more traditional gender roles.
Do you know what characters they're supposed to be?
I don't know in that particular picture. I don't. Crystal Pike choreographed the Tempest replica in 2011. Pike takes Shakespeare's work to innovative heights with projection and soundscapes and contemporary movement vocabulary. So I would like to show you an excerpt of this. and I'm kind of in love with it. It's really beautiful. So you can see, or at least I hope you noticed, her use of sort of intersections of theater and dance. So you're really seeing facial expression used in different ways. You're seeing costuming used in different ways. You're seeing the way that light can really structure a space in unique ways. And so even though she's performing this in a proscenium space, you're seeing her delineate the space in such a way that you're taken to any number of places and locations. And the way that people relate to each other in her work, it's not necessarily through text, although there is some text in the piece, and I don't know if you could really hear it, but it's kind of whispered sometimes over the soundscape, and some of it is Shakespeare's words, and some of it is her words, some of it is her dancers' words. So she asks her dancers to respond to Shakespeare's work, and she uses their language as well in the presentation of the piece. So I think that's a great example of how it's really been taken forward. So now we get to Romeo and Juliet. According to Alistair Macaulay, who's a dance critic at the New York Times, quote, "Only when the right music is found does a Shakespeare ballet have a chance of surviving." In 1935, Prokofiev completed the first version of his Romeo and Juliet. He gave it a happy ending, not because he could not bear the young lovers to die, but because he felt a ballet needed dancing near its conclusion. This revised ending caused an uproar among the top administration at the Kirov Ballet, including choreographer Leonid Lavrovsky, who rewrote the ending of the score to be a tragedy despite Prokofiev's objections. And for those of you in my choreography class, this is an example of a collaboration gone bad. The first full-length ballet production, therefore, was premiered by the Kirov Ballet in Leningrad in 1940. Since the 1950s, many ballet choreographers have tackled Romeo and Juliet. The most poetic of them, according to several critics, was Frederick Ashton's 1955 version, with the company now called the English National Ballet. But it is Kenneth Macmillan's 1965 production that has become a classic. Most years it returns to the repertoires of Royal Ballet, for which he created it, and American Ballet Theatre. Many great ballerinas' careers have been made dancing the role of Juliet in this version, including Natalia Makarova's and Natalia Osipova's. And many great choreographers have created their own versions of the ballet, including Yuri Grigorovich, Peter Martins, and Alexei Radmansky. Here's a brief example of Macmillan's version of Romeo and Juliet. To show you the balcony scene because it's arguably one of the favorite scenes of Romeo and Juliet. It's also a scene that's replicated in film. So if any of you have seen the film called The Turning Point, this was a film from the 1970s. It's awesome, you should go see it. Anne Bancroft, when she was like in her prime. And so the balcony scene was used sort of to parallel the romanticism of the main couple in the film. And then it was used again in the film Center Stage in the early 2000s. So it's often referenced in film as well. Oops. In the next section of the lecture, I want to mention a few of the ways that Shakespeare's story of Romeo and Juliet has influenced choreographers recently in genres of dance other than ballet. West Side Story, a musical choreographed by Jerome Robbins, premiered in 1957 on Broadway and in film in 1961. The musical was inspired by Romeo and Juliet and features a story about a man and a woman who fall in love despite being members of rivaling groups in Manhattan. The Montagues and Capulets are portrayed as rival gangs in West Side Story. The Sharks and the Jets are at war, tensions arising over cultural and racial differences. Tragedy strikes at the end, although Maria, Juliet's counterpart, does not die, and Tony, Romeo's counterpart, does. West Side Story remains the most iconic of Shakespeare's adaptations on film, having won 10 Academy Awards in 1961, including Best Picture. Here's a brief excerpt of the two gangs battling on the dance floor. This is the gym scene. They have the high school dance, and this is when they perform the dance mambo. And you can see them kind of warring. Really took the movement to new heights. So you're definitely seeing more of a jazz influence in this movement, and you know that based on the groundedness of the body, the different shapes in the space, the different shapes the body makes. I mean, this is definitely a jazz shape, not from classical ballet. And then you're also seeing different groupings of people in the space. Of course, it's a film, so we're not seeing the Broadway staged version of it, but it's very similar in the staged version. And instead of two families warring with each other, you're actually seeing two gangs. So the Sharks are a Puerto Rican gang, and the Jets are Caucasian American. So, I'm sorry.
They're Italian.
Yes, they're white. Ish. But I think this really shows it well, the sort of groupings that are not necessarily familial, but more cultural and racial. And then here you're seeing Robin's interpretation of Juliet and Romeo. The scene we just saw with Mambo, it happens at the dance in the high school. And that's when Maria and Tony meet and fall in love. And then there's tragedy at the end, but as I mentioned, it's definitely a different ending than Romeo and Juliet. Hip-hop choreographer Rennie Harris created a version of Romeo and Juliet called Roman Jewels for his company Pure Movement in the year 2000. Harris upended Shakespeare's story so that it became new again for a turn-of-the-century audience. In his version, Juliet, who he calls Jules, was an invisible presence, so we never actually saw an embodied Juliet on stage. She was just always kind of referenced. The Montagues and the Capulets became warring gangs called the Monster Qs and the Caps. Characters wore modern-day street attire of the early 2000s. Shakespeare's words are reinterpreted into rap lyrics to communicate a certain street cred of the players. DJs spin live on stage, and dance battles ensue, creating the heightened tension between the rival groups on stage. And I wanted to watch an excerpt of Roman Jewels as well. So you can find all of Roman Jewels online, It's on YouTube in three different sections. So if you're interested in this, it's a fantastic piece. It's not the best film quality, but it is really wonderful. Even with the bad film.
Woe for England, woe for England. Not a whit for me, for I too fond might have prevented this. But, alas, poor heart, thy kiss is comfortless as the lips you placed it on. Alas, that love, so gentle in his view, should be so tyrannous and rough and proof. No, get it together, son. Get it together, baby. Alas, that love whose view is muffled still, should without eyes see pathways to his will. Where should we die, girl? Oh, me. When she was here, did you do that? Yet tell me not, for I've heard it all. Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. So why then, oh, brawling love, you said? Huh? Oh, loving hate, you said? Oh, anything of nothing first create? Oh, happy likeness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos, a world seeming. Before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed. So what I have done by yonder sun, and you still haven't come to my bed. Jules. No, wise fool, living death, cruel kindness, eloquent silence. Eloquent silence. Oh, what a rogue and peasant, slave am I. Feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick house. Feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick house. Still waking, sleep. This is not what it is. This love little liar. There's no love in this. Oh, you ain't laughing now. Does thou not laugh? Oh, you ain't laughing now. Does thou not laugh?
When all the hoods are dead and gone, and all the drugs are forever on, and all the hustlers organize chaos that ends in blood, do you think I give up? Do you think my eyes will blink? Do you think we've cursed the madness? Do you think that you won't give a damn that I was here?
So I want to show you just a bit of the DJs too. So they sit on stage and kind of come in and out of the action. fully embodied movement. So definitely different movement vocabulary than we've seen so far today. And I think one of the things that's so innovative about his work is the way that the audience participates in this. And I don't know that if that was an intention of his, or if it started to happen and became kind of a thing, like a phenomenon that occurred around this work. But because the nature of hip-hop movement is participatory, you have battles and you create ciphers in which people go in and kind of show off what their tricks. It sort of invited that. And so several scholars have written about Roman jewels, including a woman named Anna B. Scott. And if you can find, I think her article is available online, but it's called Adaptation and Anachronism, Rennie Harris's Pure Movement. I think it's the title of it is called What's It Worth to Ya? And she has these wonderful descriptions of what happens between the performers and the audience. They become part of the performance. They start hooting and hollering. People even come up on stage sometimes and participate in the cipher with the performers. And Rennie Harris allows space in the performance for that to happen. So while you don't see necessarily the tradition of what you might see in like Ashton's or Balanchine's work, you are seeing the same kind of groupings of people on stage, the same kind of characters evolving, but in a much more innovative and unique way, and in which audiences can start to participate in it, which I think is really exciting. And back to this. In 2008, choreographer Mark Morris discovered the original Prokofiev score, you know, the one with the happy ending, and choreographed a new version of Romeo and Juliet to it. He was not afraid of this happy ending. Morris's version adheres to his typical movement vocabulary, which sits squarely in the postmodern genre. Morris offers innovative ideas about how gender is portrayed in the ballet. And while the end of the score is as Prokofiev intended, the end of Morris's dance work is kind of ambiguous, not really decisive about whether the star-crossed lovers end up happy or dead. Here is a clip of Morris discussing his process of creating this Romeo and Juliet. It's really cool to hear him talk about it.
I'm working on Romeo and Juliet.
Nah, thank you very much.
Was I supposed to? Oh, you were gonna.
Just skip
I don't
that.
know what
Perfect.
to do. Okay.
Perfect. No.
Am I skipping something? Somebody is that more of an expert on my history?
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because that's a big thing coming up.
I know.
In July
Tell me
4th.
about it,
You
yeah.
want to tell us a little bit about it?
It opens July 4th at the gorgeous theater at Bard.
This is
College.
Romeo and Juliet, Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet.
Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet, which was recently discovered. I know everybody says that all the time, but it's really true. The original version of this piece, which he hadn't finished orchestrating because it was prevented from being performed already, just on paper. They wouldn't allow it to happen. for various reasons. So the Stalin-approved version that we're used to hearing, and you can see it in some of the theaters in New York, this piece, discovered in some secret vault, you know, it's like, what was that, you know, the vault that, what's his name, opened? Yeah, Geraldo Rivera. I think it's kind of like that. It's like a little Geraldo Rivera-ish. And so Simon Morrison found the score. And so Bard College is responsible for putting it together. It's been realized, orchestrated. It was all, you know, it was all in piano and written out, and we know from other evidence. So really, like, the orchestration relates more to the suites than the ballet, which has become very, very big. It's very cinematic. In fact, that's one thing I'm not wild about. The current running score of Romeo and Juliet. So it's different. There's not a lot of new material, but it's reordered. There's some things that are in different places, some things that have been taken out because they were, you know, Frankensteined in from other pieces of his. They had to put in the big variation for the sulky dancers, and some of the rhythms were too hard. So it's weirder. There's more, the textures are different. It sounds different. There's more saxophone, clarinet. It's more percussion. It's weirder. It's smaller. It's less huge waves of string sound, and they don't die.
I was going to say, the ending's a little different,
Yeah,
eh?
and they don't die. So when Leon Botsky said, asked me, he said, "Oh, you're just who I want to talk to." I was there for some reason at Bard. Said, "We found this score, Romeo and Juliet, that's, you know, the original, that's never been performed." I said, "Oh," sarcastically, believe it or not, I said, "Oh, the one with the happy ending?" And he said, "How did you know?" I was like, "Oh my God." Because I thought, what is more ludicrous than that? So of course, Prokofiev was working with this nutty and brilliant theater director, Sergei Radlov, and he was rethinking Shakespeare. And, you know, Prokofiev is quoted as saying, "Dead people don't dance," which is kind of great. But if you've seen the Macmillan, he spends a long time swinging her corpse around. It's like, wow. That, and, you know, she's a ballerina, but it gets heavy after a while.
A dead weight.
It's like, oh, but come on. Respawn. I can't, I'm dead. Okay. So they live forever. And the last act of this ballet isn't scripted. You know, there's a very detailed libretto of what happens here. You know, this person gets killed. A lot of people get killed, except Romeo and Juliet. So she wakes up from the poison. His hand is stayed by Friar. Oh, I just made it up. His hand is stayed by Friar Lawrence so he won't kill himself. And they're like, "Wow, let's get out of here." And they go someplace and do a gorgeous dance for all eternity. And I haven't solved this problem. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it yet. But, you know, I'm working my way up to it. So it's going to be at least fascinating, if not gorgeous, which it probably will be. But I'm working on it right now. I've also never seen a production of Romeo and Juliet that isn't done by a classical ballet company. So this is my company, and another interesting thing is that, like I said, anything interesting. An interesting thing is that Romeo and Juliet is male heavy. I think maybe because there weren't any ladies acting in the theater, so all the ladies are played by young, beardless youth. And there's just a whole bunch of male characters in this show. You know, I've reinstated Rosaline, for example, but I have some women playing men's parts. So my Tybalt and my, what's his name, Mercutio, are both women. And they're scary. They're like the most consistently butch dancers. Now, in rehearsal, they're like this all the time. Like, they're full of dirty sexual innuendo jokes.
So, I also want you to see a clip of what he's talking about. This is a little excerpt of Mark Morris's Romeo and Juliet. So Mark Morris, if you've had dance history, you probably know this already, but Mark Morris was really influenced by social dance forms from Russia, from Hungary, etc. And he uses a lot of those same qualities in his movements. You could probably tell in some of these scenes where you see like the corps de ballet, they're in formations that would be sort of reminiscent of social dance forms in these cultures, and he even uses similar movements, and then he puts his own postmodern dance spin on them, which I think is really interesting. And I think you can also see elements that are reminiscent of classical ballet. And so I think Mark Morris's genius is in the way he visualizes music in his dancers' bodies. He definitely crosses boundaries with his modern dance, though, because you can see elements of social forms from other cultures and classical ballet in his work. So, most of the choreographers who explore intersections of Shakespeare and choreography do so within the confines of a proscenium stage, which I think is a missed opportunity to bring site-specific work to the fray, and also to create interdisciplinary scapes, particularly since many theater productions are staged outdoors and at differing locations. It is clear that Shakespeare's influence in dance crosses genres and time periods throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. While his storytelling made immediate connections in classical ballet and with classical composers of these time periods, the timelessness of Shakespeare's themes, stories, and ways of relishing in and playing with language have expanded into musical theater, modern and contemporary, hip-hop, and more recently, interdisciplinary investigations, such as with when we saw the Crystal Kite work, the Tempest replica. Shakespeare's legacy in dance is ongoing, and based on the work's enduringness in many dance companies across the world, there is a great chance his work will continue pushing performing artists across creative boundaries and into dialogical and interdisciplinary innovations. So thank you so much, and I would really love to open it up for questions or discussion.